Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Claire Craig. A lot of my videos have to do with cancel culture, censorship, free speech, and art. And today's video kind of touches on all of that. I'm going to be talking about recent moral panics in terms of art and what art is deemed wrong or morally incorrect, and the current movement or desire among a lot of people online to censor or suppress certain works of art. I'm going to talk about how boxing art into strict moral confines or expecting or demanding it to only fit the present day society's moral standards destroys creative innovation and the essence of what art is. The increase in people shaming others for liking what they like when they're not hurting anyone, the recent trend of absolutely everything having to be problematic and combing through TV series and songs and so on, nitpicking for things that are no longer politically correct in order to assert that the shows and movies themselves are wrong. And I will of course be using specific examples in this video, so if you want to skip around I will leave timestamps down below, though of course I recommend watching the whole thing because that's why I'm making this. So first I want to start off with a quick definition of what I mean by moralizing art, because obviously art criticism is important and valuable. I would never be against criticizing art and having discussions based on art. But when it comes to moralizing art, I'm talking specifically about believing that the content of art can be wrong, or that certain artwork shouldn't exist, certain themes shouldn't be expressed, and that certain artistic expression can be harmful or dangerous and so on. And basically the idea that you can dictate what art should and should not be. And of course there's a huge difference between how artwork can be made. For instance, exploiting children or hurting animals, you can't do that in film, and for good reason. But when it comes to the artwork itself, that's a whole other story, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on. And of course if you think a theme was poorly executed in a film, you can critique that. Art critics exist for a reason, but it is up to the individual artist whether or not they follow the critics' guidelines and change their art or not, because they have just as much right to create what they want as you have to consume what you want. And they don't have to change their artwork solely to please what you personally like. And so now that you kind of know what I mean by moralizing art, I want to do a brief little history on moral panics. Moral panics have always and will always exist. There is always some form of moral panic going on in any given society at any given time, it seems. And this is especially prevalent along art. If you think about the satanic panic back in the 1980s, a lot of people thought Dungeons and Dragons was satanic. A lot of people tried to make it so people couldn't listen to heavy metal because they thought it was demonic. When I was growing up, the big controversy was around Harry Potter. A lot of religious parents wouldn't let their children read Harry Potter because they thought it was, pagan and satanic. And then of course with NWA, and especially when Eminem hit the mainstream around the early 2000s, there was a huge moral panic around rap music and a lot of efforts, legal efforts to try and censor, for instance, Eminem's music because they didn't like the themes being portrayed or his language that he was using. People thought that because Eminem's lyrics made them uncomfortable, it should not exist in the first place, that it was going to corrupt the youth and so on, even though Slim Shady, number one, is a character, and number two, represents so much anguish and disenfranchisement that people experience from poverty and addiction and abuse, and he's given voice to a lot of people. And the reason I say Slim Shady is a character is, yeah, in his songs he's killing people, raping people, so on, but that's a character. That's not him as a person actually doing those things, and there is a really important distinction to be made in that case. When it comes to the First Amendment specifically, I talk about that in depth in my PC culture video, so I recommend checking that out after this video. But censoring things that make you uncomfortable instead of using it to gain valuable insight into the human condition and what's going on in society and the way that people feel and express themselves, I feel like does a lot more harm than good. Life is ambiguous and inherently uncomfortable. I feel like these critics, their main issue isn't with art, but with life itself. They can't look into what that experience is like. If you think about NWA and all of their songs and all the backlash against their songs, I feel like this expresses more a discomfort with the fact that people are actually living these lifestyles and this is what inner city is like. And they feel like by censoring that artwork, they don't have to deal with it rather than letting it exist as an outlet for so many people. But right now, I feel like the biggest moral panic around artwork is around sex and sexuality, especially age gap relationships, rather than, say, violence, which a lot of people are used to having moral panics around, the whole idea that video games make you violent. Nowadays, people seem to be really attacking teenage TV shows and so on for depicting too much sex and sexuality, or feeling that certain relationships shouldn't be shown on screen because it, would corrupt the youth. But what I think is so interesting about the moral panics now is that in the past it used to always be older conservative people, usually parents, and then of course the religious right. But nowadays it seems like it's literally 20-year-old girls on the internet. Like it's women in their 20s on the internet criticizing and critiquing everything and trying to cancel everything and insisting that certain artwork and song and so on shouldn't be made. It's so interesting how it's shifted that way, and if you have any insight to that, definitely comment it down down below. But to begin to highlight this moral panic around sex and sexuality, I want to tell you this brief story. I have a friend who teaches film, and every year he teaches Badlands, the classic 1970s film, and he's noticed that now when he shows it, everyone is up in arms in class about the age gap between the characters. One's 15 and one's 25, and they just can't get over this fact and are just like paranoid over it. When it's like, dude, what about the rest of the movie? What about the fact that they murder people and are serial killers? I've seen people make this criticism on the internet as well, and it's like, okay, if you're gonna take fiction as if it's real, isn't the murder the worst thing? But that's not what people are focused on nowadays. The focus right now is sexual relationships in fiction. But what I personally like the most about Badlands, because it really is like my favorite screenplay I feel like that's been written, is that it doesn't do any moralizing. It follows these two characters, these two serial killers, and it doesn't add any moral argument to their story. It doesn't judge them or anything like that. You literally just follow them along. And as with most stories, you sympathize with the narrator. Even though they're horrible and have no redeeming qualities, you want them to succeed. And I think a TV show without a strict moral argument that I think does this fantastically as well as Breaking Bad. I'm not going to give any spoilers of Breaking Bad, of course, but to me, the whole theme of the entire TV show is morality and the viewer's ability to empathize and care about people who are truly immoral. But films don't need a very black and white, simple moral structure. I mean, Disney movies have those if that's more your speed. But if you were to call the show Breaking Bad problematic because there's not a redeeming character in the show, they all do horrible things, that would just be completely moronic. And that's why this whole moralizing art and the moral panic thing is so arbitrary, because it's constantly changing. What's cancelable today will not be cancelable tomorrow, and what wasn't cancelable yesterday will be cancelable today. People are constantly changing their minds on what is and is not acceptable to be shown in art, when we know that it's constantly changing and is mostly a losing battle. I feel like we moved past the point where we think that watching a violent movie will make you a violent person, or that heavy metal will make you a violent person and an evil person. But for some reason, there's a belief going on right now that if you depict, for instance, an age gap couple on a TV show, it's going to convince little children to start sleeping with adults. The thing about artwork, and especially fiction, is it doesn't condone the behaviors that it shows, it merely presents them. Some artwork, yes, has a strong moral argument to it. Some artwork does explicitly argue things, but for the most part, it represents an experience, a story, an insight into some kind of human value. In my opinion, the best thing about good art is that it gets people talking. It seems like a lot of these Gen Z people online want to bring the Hays Code back, but instead of having characters sleep in separate beds, although they probably want that too, they want their own list of things that are and are not okay to show in movies, when these lists honestly are just so arbitrary. And so the first big artist I want to explore in this video is Lana Del Rey, because she's been constantly criticized, it seems, lately. I mean, she's been criticized since she became a popular artist, but especially right now online, a lot of people are trying to cancel her or claim that her art is harmful, or that she glorifies abuse and trauma, and that she's basically a bad influence on children, and a lot of people are having debates on whether or not her artwork should exist, which is of course insane to me, but it also opens up a lot of avenues for discussion, and that's what I'm planning on doing in this little section, although mainly I'm arguing a certain point. Basically, Lana Del Rey is a glamorous person. She makes songs based on her own experiences. A lot of her songs deal with themes such as age gaps, domestic violence, being a hopeless romantic, being submissive and feminine, being wild and free, using drugs, these kinds of things. And when it comes to people claiming that she romanticizes trauma and so on, and that this is a bad influence, the question that raises up for me is, how much responsibility is on the artist for how their audience will react? When you create a piece of artwork, you don't know how it's going to be received. You don't know how people are going to respond to it. Let's say a teenage girl does listen to your songs and then they do kind of resist getting help for a mental illness for so on because they feel connected to an artist and feel relief that way rather than getting, say, actual therapeutic relief in the traditional talk therapy sense. How much responsibility for that individual's response is on you? Because if you say the responsibility is fully on the artist, well then that is horrible. Imagine you write a memoir or a story about your experience and for some reason someone reads it and then, say, commit suicide after. Now you're fully responsible for that person's suicide, when there is most likely not a chance it's because of your artwork, it's because of compounding effects in that person's life. Sad music can't give you a mental illness. If you have a mental illness, you're probably more likely to listen to sad music because it's cathartic for you, but it doesn't make you mentally ill, and I don't understand why people can't move on past this point. The thing is, if you don't like her music, you don't have to listen to it, and if you find yourself wallowing in sad music rather than getting better, well then that's about your individual consumption. It's not about the artist doing something wrong. If you're consuming art or content that's making your mental health worse, the the answer is to stop consuming that and change things about your life. The answer isn't to try and ban it for everybody. That's like saying because you have a problem with alcohol, you think no one anywhere should ever have a beer on a Friday night. I talk about this a lot in my PC culture video when it comes to stand-up comedy, but just because something offends you, or just because you personally don't like something, or because you personally use a substance or a piece of artwork in a harmful way, doesn't mean that you get to ban that or try to advocate to ban that for everybody else. Lana Del Rey, I'll say it right now, she's my favorite pop artist. According to Spotify, I'm in like the 0.01% of her listeners, which is actually kind of concerning given she has like 60 million listeners on Spotify every year. But what I love the most about Lana Del Rey is, number one, I can relate to a lot of her experiences, and number two, she provides this emotional outlet and release for me. Like, I know a lot of people have had this experience with her music too, or with other forms of artwork, but when I listen to her with my eyes closed, it's like I'm in a whole nother world. Like, you're suspended between reality and death. You're in a whole other plane. And in my experience, that's what good art does. It's not only an escape, but it's like a deeper experience that you're able to have when you're consuming something beautiful. You could call it the sublime or whatever it is that you want, but it's basically a characteristic that a lot of people seek out through music. And I don't think it's wrong to go to those places mentally, those dreamlike states. And I don't think it's wrong to cry to sad music every now and again. I don't think it's wrong to find cathartic release through sad songs. But I think in the case of Lana Del Rey, as well as with rap music earlier on in those moral panics, you can learn more about what's triggering the criticism than the subject matter itself. I feel like the reason people want to suppress or deem Lana Del Rey's music as being problematic is because they have a discomfort with the uncomfortable things that she sings about. One of the songs people love to tear down on the internet and love to claim is problematic and glamorizes abuse and so on is a song called Ultraviolence. The main lyric in question says, "He hit me and it felt like a kiss, and he hurt me and it felt like true love." And I feel like a lot of people's gut instinct reaction based on what I've seen online is to say, oh my god, this is horrible, she can't put this out there, this is such a bad influence on young girls. And the reason they have this reaction is because they themselves are uncomfortable with dealing with the nuances of those kinds of relationships, the nuance of what that trauma feels like, the fact that it's not purely black and white. It seems like people today widely accept the fact that it's hard to leave domestic abuse situations, but they don't understand why. They just know that it's like that, and so you can't criticize someone who stays in a domestic abusive relationship. But if they, for instance, listened to this song and really felt the song, they might understand more, because the reason a lot of people stay in these situations, and it's different for everybody, but for a lot of people it's because they do have that feeling of love and they do have that sick sort of perversion within themselves, whether it's from trauma from childhood or an addiction or whatever, to where someone abusing them does feel like love to them, where they feel like any attention from this other person, even if it's violence, is worth hanging on to, and that losing them is even harder. But without understanding these situations and the nuances of these experiences, how are we ever going to help people in that situation? If you think people just stay in these relationships because they're stupid or something, and you don't understand the emotions involved, it's going to be a lot harder to say help your friend get out of that abusive relationship than it would otherwise. But people are so myopic around these things that when something makes them uncomfortable, which by the way, good art often does make people uncomfortable, that's one of the main points of its existence, they think that this is bad and it's a bad influence and it needs to be censored because they're uncomfortable with dealing with the truth. And of course, most of Lana's songs are not about trauma or abuse and so on. A lot of them are about longing and so on, and usually it's very complicated. Her relationship with these men, it's like tortured and confusing, and maybe the men don't always treat her best, but she's so enamored by them that she can't help but just be in love with them. But there was a comment on one of her videos, and I don't remember which one, so I apologize, but I thought it was really perfect, and so I'm gonna read it for you. It states, "This song is a masterpiece to me. Many found it offensive. It is a dreamy portrait of a particular kind of dangerous, extreme relationship, with imagery of sugary luxury juxtaposed with exploitation and longing. Making the song disappear does not make these kinds of relationships disappear. It is a glimpse into the heart of a human being. It is sophisticated, potent, and it is a song that convinced me that Lana Del Rey is a serious artist. Do not be afraid of truth, even when it hurts." And I think that is just such a perfect statement when it comes to artwork in general. People try to censor art when it deals with something uncomfortable, but you can't erase the human experiences that cause that artistic creation, even if that artwork is controversial. And this leads me next into Call Me By Your Name and people's criticism of Call Me By Your Name. Yes, I am very basic because not only is Lana Del Rey my favorite pop artist, but Call Me By Your Name is literally my favorite movie. But the reason some people take issue with this and view it as problematic is because there is an age gap between the two characters. One of them is 17 and the other one is 24. Though in the movie they do look like they have a little bit more of an age difference. But the reason that this is controversial is even though it takes place in 1980s Italy, where the age of consent is 14, people love to apply their current country's moral and legal standards to every single period of time ever, to every individual and culture ever, and so on and so forth. So even though at the period of time in which the fictional film was made, the relationship would have been completely legal. I don't know what Italy's laws on homosexuality were though. That might have been illegal. But according to, today's time, times in multiple states in the United States, the age of consent is 18, and so naturally, because this person is 17, this is a horrible influence, this artwork is terrible and grotesque. The fact that a 17-year-old is having sex with a 24-year-old, even though the age of consent is based on averages, it's based with the knowledge that some people are ready before and some people are ready after, but you have to have a hard line. And even though Elio is clearly precocious and intelligent and mature, he's already sexually experienced, and he's the one who pursues the older person throughout the entire movie. The fact that it doesn't abide by current American norms makes it all bad. And of course, I would never advocate for breaking the sexual laws of your country or state and so on. I would never endorse that, and I'm not saying that it's okay if you're a minor to sleep with an adult. But what I do want to say is, number one, this is a fictional movie. Just because it portrays something doesn't mean it advocates for that thing. Like I stated earlier, there are plenty of movies where people are literal murderers, which is illegal everywhere at basically every period of time, and yet people aren't saying that these things shouldn't exist. People aren't morally condemning these movies because people recognize that it's a work of fiction and that in real life you don't have to actually condone murderous behavior just because you saw a movie and you like the characters in it and you like them in that movie killing people or whatever. Call Me By Your Name is also another movie that doesn't have a strict moral argument. It doesn't moralize the relationship in any way. It literally just allows these two characters to fall in love. It shows the complexities of their emotions and their experiences. The whole movie is extremely organic. It has amazing, phenomenal acting, which is my favorite part of it, and beautiful shots. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's so well done. It's the intertwining of two souls. It's transient, it's heartbreaking, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And the fact that people will not watch this movie because of one aspect of it isn't politically correct, or in today's terms in America, legally correct, is just heartbreaking to me because it's literally, number one, a piece of fiction, but number two, it's so beautiful, and it makes me sad that people won't watch it. And so for this next section, I'm actually going to respond to some clips from another video I've seen online. I normally don't ever call out specific creators or mention specific creators by name when I'm criticizing some of their videos, but this video for me just perfectly encapsulates this recent obsession and trend online of people trying to make everything problematic and everything cancelable, even the most benign artistic expressions, and it just so perfectly encapsulates everything that makes me angry on the internet. And so this video I think is called The Problem with Dark Academia, or Why Dark Academia is Problematic, and it's by, I think her name is Alice Cappelle, and she basically argues that dark academia is problematic, and she points out all these reasons why it's problematic. Every single argument she has falls through. It's one of the most lazily done videos I've seen, yet it's, very popular and people like it. But it's basically another instance of shaming people for what they like and going through with a fine-tooth comb every single thing that's ever existed aesthetically, artistically, and only pointing out flaws within it, even if you have to make up those flaws like she does in this video. But basically, if you don't know what dark academia is, it's an aesthetic based around reading books, drinking black coffee, gothic architecture, literature, and so on, majoring in the humanities. These are all things that fit within this aesthetic. It's one that I personally enjoy because if I were to ever really be in an aesthetic, I would probably be in this one. And that's basically all you need to know, so let's see why she thinks this is problematic.
The dark academia aesthetic, as it is portrayed on social media, has been adopted and promoted by women. Yet the book characters and the film cast are very much masculine. What's even more disturbing is that the most famous books or films are written or produced by women. The Secret History was written by Donna Tartt. The Dead Poets Society was written by Nancy H. Kleinbaum. The Road Club was produced by Lon Scherfig. What's wrong with you girls? You may have encountered this term already, but this is called internalized misogyny. Women who express internalized misogyny tend to minimize the value of other women, they distrust them, and they very often think that feminism is not a rightful cause.
So first of all, just the technical thing. Dead Poet Society was written and produced by a man. The book was written after the movie came out, and that's when the woman wrote it. I have not watched the other two movies. I'm assuming that they really were written and produced by women. But the fact that this woman really believes that if you're a woman and you write a male character, it makes you a sexist is literally ludicrous, and it's just so crazy. If you extrapolate further, then that means her argument would be that you can only ever write characters who are the same gender as you, same social class, same environment. Basically, you can only write yourself, which is so antithetical to art and artistic creation. Yes, a lot of people like to base characters off themselves. A lot of people like to write memoirs. But the idea that you can't write about the opposite sex as an artist is just so fucked up. And the fact that she thinks that there's something wrong with these women for even basing their novels in, for instance, elite all-boys colleges and claiming that it's because they have internalized misogyny is just so baseless. So many great movies about men have been directed by women, and so many great novels and stories have been written about women by men. The whole point of fiction writing is having empathy for people who aren't like you. I mean, people write about hobbits and wizards and so on. Is that because they have internalized hatred against humans? No, it's because art exists in a different realm from your regular human experience. And if you're the one trying to limit women's artistic freedom, maybe you're the one with
internalized misogyny,
sweetie. But my question is, can this woman really only extract value from artwork if it's women in the TV show? Like, she's never watched a movie that's centered on men or has male characters and been able to gain anything from that? Because if that's the case, then I feel really, really bad for you. I don't know why it's impossible for you specifically to empathize with male characters or, for instance, homosexual characters if you're straight, or black characters since you're white, but that seems more like a you issue than the artist issue.
What's wrong with you girls?
But now let's look at her issue of how homosexuality is represented.
The way homosexuality is approached in the portrait of Dorian Gray can be compared to both The Secret History and The Riot Club. In the first one, Francis, one of the classic students, isn't afraid to admit that he had sex with Charles, but Charles doesn't really admit it. And in The Riot Club, Hugo Fraser, an older member of the club, seems to fancy Miles Richards. Again, homoeroticism isn't clear and is presented as an embarrassment, like it's better for them if they keep it secret. It's definitely problematic in terms of representation because it only shows one branch of the LGBTQ+ community, and the characters are encouraged to stay in the closet. None of them come out in public or to a friend.
So because a character is struggling with their sexuality and their sexual attraction and is staying in the closet, this is problematic and a bad representation and the whole thing should be thrown out the window? I hate to break it to you, but in private elite colleges in the 1980s, being gay isn't just like something that you just easily accept as soon as you figure it out about yourself. Like, there's no fucking pride parades in these elite colleges. It's not like today where if you're gay, you're celebrated. And even for me, back in like 2013-14, I'm bisexual, by the way. Coming to terms with that aspect of myself and being able to get to a point where I was actually able to date women was a challenging, difficult process for me. It was extremely emotional and difficult, and I was in the closet for a very long time. The fact that you think these realistic portrayals of sexuality and dealing with your sexuality are problematic because people aren't, baking you a rainbow cake and getting you a male stripper for your birthday is just so insane and crazy, and I genuinely don't understand where she's coming from, but so many people are like this. Characters in a different period of time aren't going to react the same way as people do in 2021 regarding these certain things. This woman doesn't care about realism in art. She doesn't care about artistic expression, period. She wants everything to follow the current woke standards and virtue signaling standards of today's society. She basically wants to get rid of nuance and humanity and just let the people on Twitter decide how movies get made. And by the way, wanting to change previously made art to reflect today's social standards is a form of revisionism. Not only do you lose artistic history and cultural value, you also lose historical accuracy. And again, with the whole not being able to relate to characters that aren't exactly like yourself. Great art at its core represents something intrinsically human that spans across centuries, across places, time period, cultural background. It allows us to enter worlds outside of our own and fully experience what it means to be human. You might not be a privileged upper-class man in some elite college in 1980 in Vermont, but through film and through storytelling and fiction and books, you're able to live that life. You can bitch that someone's writing about an exclusive and privileged club, but by showing and expressing the world of that club, even if it is fictional, you're actually being more inclusive, to use a woke term, because you're bringing more people into that life. They're able to experience something that they otherwise would never be able to. But before I continue talking about this, let's see what her next point is.
Now I'd like to move on to my second point, which is elitism. One argument is that the degrees presented in dark academia are themselves elitist. Art history, classics, Greek, Latin, etc. All those degrees are not very much employable.
So because a movie or a book focuses on humanities majors, it's problematic. Obviously, you can only make movies and stories about college students studying STEM. And then she talks throughout the video about how this aesthetic is problematic because it's Eurocentric, because a lot of the colleges and architecture are based in Europe, and apparently that's wrong because you can't obviously make a movie with white people in it. And so for that point, I just want to read some comments that I saw on her video. This one says, "I can't get it. What is wrong with being influenced by European culture? No one in dark academia says that because someone is a person of color, he or she can't belong. No one is saying that knowledge can only be obtained in Europe, nor is anyone stating that the only people from Europe were involved in science in the past. Someone else says, you have to realize that different cultures developed along different lines. There is no one single aesthetic that is all-inclusive. It doesn't make sense to demand any culture to be all-inclusive because by definition a culture is the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or social group. And then the final comment I want to read says, I'm sorry, but the issues you mentioned doesn't apply to the community. They have always been progressive. Why is it problematic for an aesthetic to be Eurocentric? Just because it's derived from a certain period of European history doesn't mean that it inherits racism and sexism. As a non-Caucasian, I love DA because it is exotic, and in my opinion, there is no need to include other cultures' aesthetics. When people want to include it, they create a hybrid version of dark academia, and nobody is stopping them. I feel like you are criticizing issues that don't even exist. And then someone replies saying, same. I couldn't care less if it's Eurocentric. It could be Afrocentric, Asian-centric, or whatever else. It's quite pretty. And putting race into it out of nowhere is pretty stupid and kind of racist in itself. I say this as a mostly black person. And this, of course, is something that's been going on for a very long time. People who severely lack critical thinking skills or who are just majorly influenced by social media believe that if anything involves a white person, it's wrong, and that any art that's based on European culture is bad. It's truly idiotic. I don't mind conversations about representation and diversity and so on, and how certain races are portrayed, and racial tropes, tokenism, all that kind of thing. But the idea that because something exists that is mainly enjoyed by white people or mainly features white people, that makes it inherently racist or problematic, I think that is so insane. No one would be saying that if any of these films or movies were based in Africa or based in Asia or anywhere else and had very little diversity within them other than the races from those countries. But for whatever reason, if it's white people, that's different. You can argue about it in the comments if that's what you want. But I don't understand why every piece of art and every piece of fashion and aesthetic and so on has to be politicized. Can't people just enjoy things? It's genuinely not that deep. People genuinely put so much effort into creating issues that don't even exist. And so now, before I do a little section on stand-up comedy, I do want to talk about censorship and what kinds of censorship I think are okay that aren't actual forms of censorship. Number one, like I said earlier, there's a difference between moralizing or making illegal certain practices in the creation of artwork, for instance, exploiting animals or children and so on. There obviously should be laws that artists have to abide to when it comes to creating their artwork. But I think we have to recognize that moralizing those things and making laws around those things is different than condemning art itself and the themes or subject matter within art itself. And then, as many people know, the Hays Code existed between 1934 and 1968. This was a list of topics that would be censored in Hollywood and in film if they were created. It came about when, at the time, the Supreme Court had ruled that the First Amendment does not apply to film, and so a lot of people were moralizing within their own states or areas about what films could and couldn't show. And so film had to abide by very strict moral standards in terms of its content in order to appeal to everybody. This is why you couldn't have interracial couples, you couldn't have couples sleeping in the same bed, you couldn't use a lot of swear words or have really any sexual nature to your content. And then finally, the Supreme Court overturned their decision, and the First Amendment now does apply to film. You are allowed freedom of speech and artistic expression within artwork and within film. And so in replace of the Hays Code, we got the rating system, rated PG, PG-13, R, and so on. And I think this is a fantastic compromise. I think this is totally fine, because it's true that you don't want to show an R or an X-rated movie to your toddler. And so now when you buy a movie or see a movie and it has that rating, you kind of know what to expect. And I think this is obviously way better than just censoring the art and suppressing all the art and making sure every single thing is kid-friendly. And I think this also makes it a lot easier for people to avoid art that they think would be triggering or that they don't want to watch, because things have ratings, and now with the internet there's always synopsises online and so on. And if you don't like a piece of artwork, if Lana Del Rey offends you, if Call Me By Your Name offends you, you simply don't have to watch it. And so when it comes to censorship, I think the conversation should be more about access rather than the content itself. For instance, if a kid's TV channel like Cartoon Network was playing something totally inappropriate, I would be very mad, and I would want them to not be showing that, and that wouldn't be censorship. That would be about access. That would be about putting an adult content onto a kid's channel. It's not about making that content not exist because I don't like it. And unfortunately, something I've heard a lot, this is in every comment section of every video out there that's nitpicking, Gossip Girl, Pretty Little Liars, any kind of teen TV show, especially Euphoria now. Everyone's calling it problematic, and this is an issue, and the writers should be ashamed of themselves because they portray sex and drugs and so on among teenagers, even though they use adult actors and these have ratings on them. Euphoria specifically was not made for teenagers or children, it was made for adults. But people say that because young people bypass rating systems anyway and will consume the content, that it's problematic for this content to exist, and that artists should change their content to be less harmful, even though this is not their responsibility. If somebody who is underage sneaks into an R-rated movie and gets offended, that is their fault. That rating system is there for a reason. That's the whole reason that rating systems exist in the first place. And again, you can't just want every single piece of artwork to be kid-friendly because a kid might watch it. That's just insane. But literally you will see that in every single comment section of every popular video criticizing teen TV traumas. And so finally, my section on stand-up comedy is short because I talk about this more in my PC culture video, but I do feel like comedy and stand-up comedy especially has been the #1 art form under attack by political correctness and by cancel culture. People are less open to artistic innovation in general because they're made to feel shameful for enjoying anything that isn't in line with the constantly narrowing politically correct norms of the time. And so naturally people are feeling bad if they go to a comedy show and laugh at dark humor and so on. But the thing about stand-up comedy is the basic art form is towing the line. It's finding the line of what people will laugh at and what is too dark. And of course, sometimes you're gonna cross that line. That's just a part of the art. But like I said with film and TV, making a joke doesn't mean condoning that behavior. Portraying something in film doesn't mean you condone those actions in real life. But for some reason, people have an especially hard time with this when it comes to comedy. Comedy is just made to make you laugh. You can laugh at a horrible joke and not be a horrible person, as I've stated before. And I think this clip from Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee sums it up perfectly.
And what is the internal logic of comedy?
That you'll do anything for a laugh,
That's
like
right.
a sociopath.
That's right. My wife, it's taken 16 years to marry. She finally understands. I don't mean any of this. We will put any words together.
Oh, she knows.
I don't know what I'm saying.
Right. There was a sequence of words that you knew had a laugh at the end of it.
That's right.
So you said them.
That's it.
Yeah.
You just described my entire brain.
But because comedy is most closely associated with free speech and with taboo topics and with the dark sides of humanity and so on, it makes sense it's the first thing to go when a society becomes more narcissistic and kind of totalitarian around the artwork that it allows to exist or not. And as I stated in a previous video, I do think cancel culture will end. I think it will eventually eat itself. And I think at the end of this, there's going to be a huge boom, at least I really hope, in creative innovation and artistic expression, because people will be so open to new art forms and styles and are just going to be way more open-minded and available to receive and produce artwork even if it isn't in a strict moral confine of the present society. And so to end this video, I want to play a little clip from Dave Chappelle's acceptance speech for the Mark Twain Comedy Award. I think he just sums this up perfectly, the whole free speech and comedy thing. And of course, before I play that, make sure to like and subscribe if you like this video. If you're upset, sorry, leave a comment of everything that's on your mind. If you're subscribed, I'll see you next time. And with that, I'm going to play the clip.
And unbeknownst to many people in this audience, I don't think there's opinion that it exists in this country that is not represented in a comedy club by somebody. Each and every one of you has a champion in the room. We watch you guys fight, but when we're together, we talk it out. I know comics that are very racist, and I watch them on stage, and everyone's laughing, and I'm like, that mother means that. Don't get mad at them, don't hate them. We go upstairs and have a beer, and sometimes I even appreciate the artistry that they paint their racist opinions with. Man, it's not that serious. The First Amendment is first for a reason. The Second Amendment is just in case the first one doesn't work out.